Okay, we're going to be looking at problem solving with rational exponents. So, kind of made up a question here. This part is just to define a formula. It says compound annual interest can be calculated with this formula, and this is the formula we have. A meaning your total amount is equal to the principal, that's the amount you start with, multiplied by 1 plus your interest rate to the power of n being the number of years. Okay. And then there is technically a little more to this formula, but because it's annual, it can be simplified this way.
What is the outside?
This is an I.
No, the one before that.
This is a 1.
Oh, it's one.
That's an actual number 1. Yeah, sorry about that. It's not L. Good question. So our question says you have $500, which means the $500 is our principal. Okay, so that's what our P is equal to in this case. You want to have $800 in 20 years, so that's going to be the total amount. So that's going to be our A in this question. And in 20 years is how many years has passed, so that will be our N in this example. The question asks us, what interest rate will you need in order to essentially obtain this? Remember, you can always print this out after. So, our question saying A was equal to P times 1 plus I to the N. So they've given us this formula. We're going to fill in a bunch of the numbers. Our total amount will be 800. The amount we start with, our principal, is 500. We still have 1 plus I. And our exponent, or number of years, is 20 in this case. Okay. So the goal here is to find out our interest rate, which looks somewhat difficult. It's kind of masked in a whole bunch of equations here. So we need to get the I by itself. Now, if you guys recall, when I talked about moving things left and right, when we're trying to isolate, we usually use something called kind of reverse bedmass. Okay? So I want you to think of bedmass. What would be the first thing if we were working with bedmass that we deal with? Brackets. Okay, so in these brackets, is there anything to simplify? Or there's nothing we can really do with that, okay? The next thing we would do is what? Exponents. And then the last thing we would do is, okay, but in this case, it'd be the multiplication. That would be the last thing. There's only 3 things we can really do in terms of bedmass. So since the multiplication would be the last thing we'll do, when we're isolating, it's going to be the first thing that we move. Okay? So I want to move this 500 to the other side, and it's multiplied here. So what do I have to do? That's right, we have to divide. So we need to move it to the other side. I'm going to write it as a fraction. So it'll be 800 divided by 500 is equal to, the 500 is now gone, and we have 1 plus I to the power of 20. Okay? So we might want to simplify what that value is. 8 by 5, 1.6. Okay. So it becomes 1.6 in this case. 1.6 is equal to 1 plus I to the power of 20. Same thing again. We would normally deal with brackets first and then the exponent. So the last thing we would do is the exponent. So I want to move it to the other side. To move the power of 20 to the other side, what does it have to become? Not the square root, but the 20th root when we go to the other side. So this will now read the 20th root of 1.6 is equal to 1 plus I. So we need to equate the 20th root. All right, got to remember that 1.6. Okay, so for me, I think this goes to the 20th root. 1.0237. I'm going to write it like that. 1.0237. Okay, so I put that in my calculator. 1 plus I. Oops. How do I isolate the I? I still have to isolate it. What do I got to move? 1. And when we move 1 to the other side, what does it become? Subtract. Okay? So when I subtract 1 from this, essentially the 1 in the front is going to disappear. Use your calculator if you're unsure how I get this. But 1.0237 subtract 1 is just going to be 0.0237 is equal to the value of I. I stands for an interest rate, and we represent interest rate with percentage. Does anyone know what percent that would be?
2%.
Yeah, it'd be 2 point what, technically? 2.37%. How did you get that? That's right. To go from here to here, You multiply by 100. So that means the interest rate I would need is a bank that gives me an interest rate of 2.37% to turn my $500 into $800 in 8 years. Or sorry, not 8 years, I like 20 years.